The War Council had been droning on for what felt like 6 stellar cycles, though my internal chronometer insisted it had only been 43 minutes. Commander Vextal was mid-sentence about honor and glory when the proximity alarms started screaming. "Hostile fire detected," the tactical officer announced, which was perhaps the most unnecessary statement in the history of unnecessary statements, given that our ship was currently being torn apart. I gripped my seat restraints as the Crimson Talon lurched sideways. Sparks erupted from 3 different consoles. Someone was shouting about shield failure. Another voice mentioned something about a hull breach. The usual end-of-battle soundtrack. "All personnel to escape pods," Vextal bellowed, finally saying something useful. I unbuckled and ran, my combat boots clanging against metal floors that were rapidly becoming walls as the ship tilted. Behind me, the bridge exploded in a spectacular display of fire and depressurization. Definitely not going back that way. The escape pod bay was chaos incarnate. Warriors were shoving each other, screaming coordinates, arguing about seating arrangements while the ship literally disintegrated around us. Peak military efficiency, truly. I dove into Pod 17, slamming my fist against the launch button before anyone else could pile in. The door hissed shut. The explosive bolts fired. And then I was spinning through space like a very expensive, very poorly designed carnival ride. Through the viewport, I watched the Crimson Talon break into 3 distinct pieces, each one trailing atmosphere and debris like morbid party streamers. Somewhere in that wreckage were 47 of my fellow warriors. I'd probably liked at least 3 of them. The pod's navigation system beeped helpfully. Gravitational pull detected. Trajectory locked. Impact in 90 seconds. "Oh, good," I muttered. Just enough time to reflect on my life choices. The planet below was blue and green and entirely too peaceful-looking for something I was about to crash into at terminal velocity. The pod started shaking as we hit the atmosphere. Heat shields engaged with a whine that suggested they were really not happy about their current employment. 60 seconds. The shaking intensified. I could see continents now. Oceans, white clouds that looked soft and welcoming, and were absolutely not going to cushion my landing in any meaningful way. 30 seconds. Buildings appeared. Roads. Vehicles moving along them in neat, orderly lines. A civilization. Wonderful. I was going to crater into someone's civilization. 10 seconds. I could make out individual structures now. A large one, rectangular, surrounded by smaller ones. The navigation system seemed very excited about this particular building, steering directly toward it with what I could only describe as enthusiasm. 5 seconds. A roof. I was looking at a roof. Specifically, the roof I was about to go through. 0. The impact was everything you'd expect from a multi-ton escape pod meeting a building at high speed. Metal screamed. Concrete crumbled. Something exploded, though I wasn't entirely sure if it was part of the pod or part of the building. The crash webbing kept me from being liquefied, but just barely. When the world stopped spinning, I ran a quick self-diagnostic. All limbs present and functional, spine intact, minor lacerations, combat armor holding. Could be worse. I could be dead. I hit the emergency release. The pod door blew outward with a bang, and I stumbled out into, of all things, a classroom. The walls were covered in colorful displays. Small desks sat in neat rows. Charts about mathematics hung beside images of historical figures. And seated at those desks were approximately 30 small humans, all staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to fascination, to what might have been hunger, but was probably just curiosity. At the front of the room, Behind a larger desk covered in papers and what appeared to be a half-eaten sandwich, sat a human female. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical style, glasses perched on her nose, and an expression of such profound, bone-deep exhaustion that I recognized it immediately. I'd seen it in the mirror enough times. She looked at me, then at the smoking crater where part of her ceiling used to be, then back at me. Then she sighed, long and weary, as if I was just one more item on a very long list of problems she didn't have time to deal with. "You're late," she said softly, her voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "For your last lesson." I stared at her. Behind me, the escape pod sparked and hissed. Debris continued to fall from the ceiling. The entire room smelled like burnt metal and ozone. And this human, this impossibly calm human, had just delivered what was either a threat or an observation, and I couldn't tell which. I began, then stopped, because what exactly does one say in this situation? Apologies for the entrance. She picked up a marker, stepped around her desk, and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room with the casual confidence of someone who had seen far stranger things than alien warriors crashing through her ceiling. "Class, this is, and I'm going to take a wild guess here, not a scheduled fire drill." One small human raised their hand. "Miss Parker, is that an alien?" "Very observant, Jamie." "Yes, that appears to be an extraterrestrial being who has just destroyed roughly 40% of our classroom infrastructure." She turned to me. "Do you have a name, or should I just mark you down as unplanned visitor number 3? "Krell," I said, because my brain had apparently decided that normal conversation was the appropriate response to this surreal situation. "Krell of the Crimson Talon, 3rd Assault Division. And, what do you mean, number 3? Miss Parker's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "We had a raccoon last month that I'm fairly certain was not native to this dimension. Before that, a very confused exchange student who claimed to be from the future. You're actually my first alien warrior, though, so congratulations on that distinction." Another hand shot up. "Are you going to kill us?" "Marcus!" Miss Parker's voice sharpened. "We don't ask people about their murder plans. It's rude." "Sorry, Miss Parker." She turned back to me, and I noticed her hand was resting casually near a desk drawer. "Well, are you going to kill us, Krell of the Crimson Talon?" I looked at the small humans. They looked back with the kind of fearless curiosity that only children possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned that the universe is full of things that want to eat them. One was actually waving at me. Another was sketching something in a notebook, probably documenting this for posterity. "No," I said slowly. "No, that would be unnecessarily complicated." "Good answer." Her hand moved away from the drawer, though I noticed she didn't relax entirely. "In that case, you have 2 options. Option 1. You leave through the door. Deal with whatever authorities will inevitably arrive to ask you extremely pointed questions about property damage and possible invasion protocols. Option 2. You sit down, be quiet, and let me finish teaching photosynthesis. Then we'll figure out what to do with you." I blinked, all 4 of my eyes. "You want me to sit through a lesson? Unless you have somewhere more pressing to be, do you?" I thought about the ship, currently in multiple pieces orbiting this planet. I thought about my unit, scattered across who knows how much space. I thought about the enemy forces that had just handed us our mandibles on a tactical display. "No," I admitted. "I really don't." "Excellent." She pointed at the back of the room where a chair sat, far too small for my frame. "That desk. Try not to break it." And that's how I, Krell, decorated war hero of the Crimson Talon, veteran of 17 campaigns across 9 systems, found myself sitting in a tiny plastic chair in a human elementary school classroom while Miss Parker resumed her lesson on plant biology. Now, as I was saying before we were interrupted by Mr. Krell's dramatic entrance, photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert light energy into chemical energy. A student raised her hand. Miss Parker, does his planet have photosynthesis? Parker looked at me, one eyebrow raised. Yes, I said, feeling absurd. Though our primary vegetation uses a different wavelength of light, more toward the ultraviolet spectrum. Fascinating. Everyone write that down. We're apparently having an impromptu xenobotany session. The students scrambled for their notebooks. I watched as they scribbled notes, some of them sneaking glances at me with expressions of wonder. One child, a small male with bright red hair, kept trying to catch my eye so he could make silly faces. Miss Parker continued teaching, somehow incorporating my presence into her lesson without missing a beat. She asked about my homeworld's atmosphere. She questioned the evolutionary advantages of my 4-eyed vision. She even got me to explain the bioluminescent flora that grew in the southern continents of Kethvar. And through it all, she maintained that same calm, slightly exhausted demeanor, as if alien invaders were just another Tuesday afternoon inconvenience, somewhere between surprise assemblies and broken printers. 20 minutes into the lesson, the door burst open. 3 more warriors stumbled in, their armor scorched and dented. I recognized Torv, Mikax, and Lieutenant Shekar. They looked around wildly, weapons raised, and then stopped dead when they saw me sitting in a tiny chair, surrounded by children. Krell? Torv's voice was incredulous. What in the 7 hells are you doing? Learning about photosynthesis, I replied, because what else was I supposed to say? Miss Parker turned from the board slowly. Very slowly. The kind of slow that predators use before they strike. Gentlemen, she said, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze hydrogen. You are interrupting my class. Lower your weapons, or I will be forced to give you detention. And trust me, you don't want to find out what that entails. Shekar, a decorated officer who had personally led the assault on the Gravik stronghold, actually lowered his weapon. We didn't mean to. I don't care what you meant to do. What you did was burst into my classroom without knocking, tracked mud across my floor, and disrupted the educational process. Sit. Down. They sat. On the floor, because there weren't any chairs big enough. Now, Parker continued, turning back to the board, where were we? Ah, yes, the Calvin cycle. Can anyone tell me what happens during the light-independent reactions? A student raised her hand. Is this going to be on the test? Everything is always on the test, Rebecca. You should know this by now. I watched as Miss Parker taught, as these small humans absorbed information with the kind of focus that my military training officers would kill for, as my fellow warriors sat on the floor, looking increasingly uncomfortable and confused. And then I noticed the way Parker's hand kept drifting toward that desk drawer, the way she positioned herself between us and the children, the way her eyes tracked every movement we made, cataloging threats, calculating responses. This human wasn't calm because she was unaware of danger. She was calm because she'd already assessed the situation, made her plans, and decided that the best way to control 4 heavily armed alien warriors was to treat them like misbehaving students. It was possibly the most terrifying thing I'd encountered in my entire military career. The lesson continued for another 15 minutes before the real authorities arrived. I heard sirens first, then shouting, then the distinctive sound of military vehicles pulling up outside. Parker glanced at the window. "Well, that was faster than usual. Class, please remain seated and calm. Mr. Krell and his friends are about to have a very interesting conversation with some very serious people." "Are they going to take them away?" Jamie asked, sounding disappointed. "Probably. But perhaps we'll see them again. Education has a way of bringing people together, after all." She looked at me, and her expression softened slightly. "You survived a ship destruction, a catastrophic landing, and an entire photosynthesis lesson. I'd say your odds of surviving whatever comes next are pretty good." The door burst open again. This time it was humans in military uniforms, weapons drawn, faces hard. "Everyone down! Hands where we can see them!" The students ducked under their desks with practiced ease. My warriors and I raised our hands, a universal gesture of surrender that apparently transcended species. But before the soldiers could storm in, Parker stepped forward, placing herself directly between us and the armed forces. "Gentlemen, you are interrupting my class. Again. I'm going to need you to wait in the hallway until the period ends. We have 7 minutes remaining, and these students have a test on Friday." The lead soldier stared at her. "Ma'am, these are potentially hostile alien combatants who crashed through your roof." "Yes, and they've been very well behaved for the last 40 minutes. They've even contributed to our science discussion. I'm not about to reward educational participation with immediate arrest. It sends the wrong message. Miss Parker, 7 minutes." Her voice could have cut steel. "Unless you want to explain to the superintendent why you felt it necessary to traumatize 30 children by conducting a military operation during their science lesson, I suggest you wait outside." The soldier looked at us, looked at her, looked at the children peeking out from under their desks. Then, incredibly, he nodded. 7 minutes. Then they're coming with us." "Fair enough." Parker turned back to the class. "All right, everyone, back to your seats. Let's review what we've learned today. Who can summarize the main stages of photosynthesis?" Hands shot up, and for 7 more minutes, we sat in that damaged classroom, surrounded by debris and armed soldiers and the very real possibility of imprisonment, or worse, learning about plants. When the period finally ended, Parker walked to her desk and pulled open that drawer I'd been watching. Inside wasn't a weapon, as I'd suspected. It was a roll of stickers. She walked over to me and, with complete seriousness, placed a gold star on my chest plate. "For participation," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "And for making the choice not to be a monster when you could have been. That takes a kind of strength that most people never understand." Then she turned to the soldiers. "He's all yours. Try not to break him. I might want to invite him back for career day." As they led us out in restraints, past news cameras and government officials, and what appeared to be half the planet's military, I looked back at that classroom one last time. Miss Parker was already cleaning up, sweeping debris, repositioning desks, preparing for the next day's lessons as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And I realized something that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. Humans weren't dangerous because they were violent or aggressive or technologically advanced. They were dangerous because they could look at chaos, at war, at alien warriors falling from the sky, and respond by teaching a lesson about photosynthesis with such unshakable determination that even hardened soldiers felt compelled to sit down and learn. The holding facility was exactly what you'd expect from a species that had just been invaded by accident. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed like a dying insect, and chairs that were somehow less comfortable than the ones in Miss Parker's classroom. They'd separated us into different cells, which was probably smart. Torv had a tendency to complain, and I really didn't want to listen to it right now. A man in a dark suit walked in 3 hours later. He had the look of someone who'd missed lunch, dinner, and possibly his own birthday. His badge read, Agent Morrison, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. So, he said, dropping a file on the table between us, you want to tell me what you're doing on Earth? Crashing, mostly. It wasn't exactly planned. Your ship engaged in combat in our orbital space. That makes it planned enough. I leaned back, or tried to. The chair didn't cooperate. We were fleeing the Zalgorath fleet. They ambushed us near the outer asteroid belt. We didn't even know your planet was inhabited until we were burning through the atmosphere. Morrison's expression didn't change. The Zalgorath. Should that name mean something to me? Only if you care about the genocidal empire currently sweeping through this sector, eliminating anything that moves and a fair number of things that don't. We were part of a coalition force trying to slow them down. Clearly, we failed. He wrote something down. And the others with you? My unit. What's left of it, anyway? There were 47 of us on that ship this morning. Now, there are 4. Basic math would suggest that's not a good survival rate. Where are the other pods? Scattered, different trajectories. Could be anywhere on your planet, or they burned up on entry, or they're floating in orbit, waiting for retrieval that's never coming. Take your pick. Morrison studied me for a long moment. You're very calm for someone whose entire crew just died. I'm very tired for someone whose entire crew just died. There's a difference. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Tell me about the teacher. What about her? She didn't panic, didn't scream, didn't evacuate her students. She just kept teaching. That's not normal. I noticed. Did she threaten you? Coerce you in any way? I laughed. Actually laughed. With what? Her marker? Her disappointment? She didn't need to threaten us. She just made it very clear that the correct course of action was to sit down, shut up, and learn about plants. And somehow, impossibly, we did. Morrison leaned forward. Why? Because, I said slowly, trying to find the right words in their language, she reminded me of my combat instructor, the one who could stop a riot by walking into a room. Authority isn't about size or weapons or volume. It's about absolute certainty. She knew exactly what was going to happen, and she made sure we knew it too. And what was going to happen? We were going to sit through her lesson, learn something, and leave quietly. Any other option involved significantly more paperwork for everyone involved. This time Morrison did smile, just a little. She gave you a gold star. She did. Why? You'd have to ask her. I'm still trying to figure that part out myself. He closed the file. We're running analysis on your pod, your armor, your weapons. Everything checks out with your story so far. The orbital debris matches your ship's signature. We've also picked up 3 more of your people. They're being processed now. Processed? That's a pleasant way of saying imprisoned. Would you prefer I call it what it is? Honestly, I'd prefer to be somewhere else entirely. But we don't always get what we want, do we? Morrison stood. We'll continue this tomorrow. In the meantime, try not to break anything. The repairs to that school are coming out of someone's budget, and that someone is very unhappy about it. Send them my regards. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Krell, I believe you. About the Zalgorath, about the accident, about all of it. But belief doesn't change protocol. You're still unidentified aliens on sovereign territory, and that means procedures, evaluations, and a lot of very boring meetings. Sounds delightful. Oh, it won't be, but it beats being shot on sight, which was option 2. After he left, I sat in that uncomfortable chair and stared at the gold star still stuck to my chest plate. The adhesive was surprisingly strong. I'd tried to remove it earlier, but it had refused to budge, clinging on with what felt like spite. Participation. She'd given me a sticker for participation. I'd led assault teams through fortified positions. I'd coordinated orbital strikes. I'd held the line at the Battle of Keith's Ridge while 3 divisions retreated behind me. And the thing I'd receive recognition for on this planet was sitting quietly while learning about chlorophyll. The universe had a truly bizarre sense of humor. 2 days passed in a blur of interviews, medical examinations, and cultural orientation sessions that mostly involved humans explaining concepts like personal space and appropriate greetings and please don't eat the local wildlife. The other 3 warriors from my unit were going through the same process in adjacent facilities. We were allowed brief communications, enough to confirm we were all equally confused and uncomfortable. On the 3rd day, Agent Morrison returned with unexpected news. "You're being released." I stared at him. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Released. Conditionally. With monitoring. And a very long list of rules you absolutely cannot break unless you want to be immediately vaporized by about 6 different weapons systems." "Why?" Morrison handed me a tablet displaying a news article. The headline read, "Local Teacher Defends Alien Visitors, Calls for Diplomatic Approach." Below it was a picture of Miss Parker standing in front of her rebuilt classroom, arms crossed, expression defiant. The article quoted her extensively. She'd apparently given interviews to every major news outlet, explaining in precise detail how we'd behaved peacefully, contributed to the educational discussion, and surrendered without resistance. She'd described us as refugees, not invaders, survivors, not threats. "She's been making quite a lot of noise," Morrison said. "Between her testimony, the analysis of your ship's logs, and the fact that you've all been completely cooperative, the higher-ups have decided that imprisonment isn't the best approach. Instead, you're going to be cultural ambassadors." "I'm a soldier, not a diplomat." "Well, now you're both. Congratulations on your career change." "What does that even mean?" "It means you'll be living under observation, participating in cultural exchange programs, helping us understand your people and your technology. In return, you get freedom, resources, and protection from anyone who decides alien visitors aren't welcome." "And if I refuse?" "Then you go back to indefinite detention while we figure out what else to do with you. But I don't think you want that." He was right. I didn't. "There's one more condition," Morrison added, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Miss Parker has volunteered to be your primary cultural liaison." "She what?" "She's filed all the paperwork, passed the security clearances, and made it very clear that if anyone else is assigned to your case, she'll make their lives profoundly difficult." Her words, not mine. Something about educational responsibility and finishing what she started. I processed this information slowly. Let me understand this correctly. The teacher whose classroom I destroyed is now responsible for teaching me how to function in human society. That's the situation, yes. And this seems reasonable to everyone involved? Reasonable? No. But she's stubborn. You're cooperative. And frankly, we're all making this up as we go. First contact wasn't supposed to happen like this. We don't have protocols for accidental invasions. Neither do we. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. They released me that afternoon with an ankle monitor, a phone programmed with emergency contacts, and a list of rules so long it required its own carrying case. Do not approach restricted areas. Do not discuss military technology with unauthorized personnel. Do not consume products containing ethanol. That last one had an asterisk leading to a 3-page explanation about human metabolism and why alcohol would probably kill me. Miss Parker picked me up in a vehicle so old I could hear parts rattling that probably had specific functions once. She wore casual clothing instead of her classroom attire, but maintained that same expression of patient exhaustion. "Get in," she said. "We're going shopping." Shopping? You need clothes. That armor might be practical, but it's also terrifying children and setting off metal detectors. Unless you want to spend your entire visit explaining yourself to security guards, you need something that blends in. I'm 8 feet tall with 4 eyes and skin that looks like granite. I don't think I'm going to blend in regardless of clothing choices. Not with that attitude, you won't. Now get in the car before I change my mind about this entire arrangement. I folded myself into the passenger seat, which required removing my armor plating and contorting in ways my species wasn't designed for. Parker drove with the casual aggression of someone who'd learned in a combat zone, weaving through traffic while explaining the rules of her household. First, no weapons. I don't care if it's ceremonial or traditional or makes you feel safe. Second, you'll help with chores. I'm not running a hotel. Third, we eat dinner together every night. It's called family time, and it's non-negotiable. Questions? You're letting me stay in your home. The government is paying me a substantial stipend to house and educate you. I'm a public school teacher. Do you have any idea what I can do with that kind of funding? I can finally fix the heating system. That's the only reason? She was quiet for a moment. No, it's not. But we'll get to the rest later. The shopping trip was surreal. Humans stopped and stared, some taking pictures, others keeping their distance. Children were braver, approaching to ask questions while their parents hovered nervously. Parker ran interference, politely declining autograph requests and redirecting the more invasive inquiries. We found clothing in a specialty store that catered to unusual sizes. The owner, a cheerful woman named Gloria, took measurements and made suggestions without once acting like I was anything other than a regular customer with irregular proportions. "The blue brings out your eyes," she said, holding up a shirt. "All 4 of them." Parker nodded approvingly. "We'll take 3. Back at Parker's house, which was small but comfortable, she showed me to a guest room that had clearly been prepared in advance. The bed was reinforced. The doorway had been widened. There were books on the shelf about Earth history, human culture, and basic language guides. "You've been planning this," I said. "Since the day you crashed into my classroom." I had a feeling. They'd release you eventually, and I wanted to be ready. "Why?" She sat on the edge of the bed, looking more tired than I'd ever seen her. "Do you know what it's like, teaching children who've seen too much? Who've lived through things they shouldn't have to? You learn to recognize trauma, Krell. You learn to spot the ones who are holding themselves together through sheer force of will, because falling apart isn't an option. I'm a soldier. I've been trained for this. So were the students I've taught who lived through the downtown bombing 3 years ago. Training doesn't make you immune. It just makes you better at hiding it." I sat down on the floor, unable to meet her eyes. 47 people. I served with some of them for years, and I don't even know if they died quickly or if they suffered. I don't know if they had time to be afraid. But you know you survived, and that comes with its own weight. How do you know that? Because I was in the bombing. I was substitute teaching at Central Elementary when the building collapsed. 17 children died in my section alone. I got out with minor injuries. And for months afterward, everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Lucky? As if watching children die was some kind of fortunate event because I happened to live through it. I'm sorry. Don't be. Be here. Be present. Be willing to accept that surviving doesn't require justification. She stood. Dinner's at 6. We're having pasta. I hope your species can process wheat. We can. Good. Set the table. Plates are in the cabinet above the sink. And just like that, she left me sitting in that room, processing the fact that this human who'd faced down 4 armed warriors with nothing but a marker and sheer determination had her own battles that had nothing to do with alien invasions. Dinner was surprisingly normal. We ate, we talked about mundane things like weather and the structural integrity of her roof, and we carefully avoided discussing anything too heavy. It was comfortable in the way that fragile things are comfortable, requiring gentle handling and careful words. Afterward, while washing dishes, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the classroom. The gold star. Why did you give it to me? Parker dried a plate thoughtfully. Because you made a choice. You could have reacted with violence when you crashed. You were armed, trained, and probably terrified. But you assessed the situation, recognized you weren't in immediate danger, and chose cooperation. That's not instinct. That's character. Or self-preservation. Maybe, but I prefer to think it was decency. She put the plate away. The universe you've described sounds brutal, Krell. Empires destroying each other, endless war, survival at any cost. But you sat in my classroom and learned about plants, because I asked you to. That tells me something important. What? That maybe there's hope for all of us, after all. The weeks that followed established a routine. Mornings involved language lessons and cultural studies. Parker was a demanding teacher, correcting pronunciation and challenging assumptions with the same energy she brought to her regular students. Afternoons were for errands, community integration, and what she called exposure therapy, which mostly meant going places until people stopped treating me like an exhibit. The other warriors were placed with different liaisons, but we met regularly to compare experiences. Torv was living with a retired military officer and seemed perpetually confused by human dining etiquette. Mikex had been placed with a scientist who kept asking uncomfortable questions about our biology. Lieutenant Shekar was staying with a diplomat's family and looked more exhausted than when we'd been fighting for our lives. "How's Parker?" Shekar asked during one of our meetings. "Relentless. She treats cultural integration like a military campaign." "Lucky you. My host family keeps trying to set me up on dates. Apparently, I'm exotic." Torv snorted. "At least they're not studying you. My liaison made me participate in a physical fitness assessment. For science," he said. "I think he just wanted to see if I could beat his bench press record." "Could you?" "Obviously. But he made me do it 3 times to verify the results." We laughed, and for a moment, it felt like the before times. Back when we were soldiers with a mission instead of refugees with ankle monitors. But the moment passed, as moments do. 2 months after the crash, Parker brought me back to the school. The classroom had been fully repaired, the ceiling replaced, new desks installed. Her students were there, waiting with the kind of excited energy that suggested they'd been preparing for this. "Class," Parker announced, "Mr. Krell has agreed to be our guest speaker today. He'll be talking about his homeworld and answering your questions. Please be respectful and remember, we don't ask about weapons or invasions. Those topics are off limits." Hands shot up immediately. I spent the next hour describing Kethvar, my planet's twin suns, the floating cities built into the mountain ranges, the bioluminescent forests that glowed at night. I talked about our food, our festivals, our traditions of storytelling around the fire. I carefully avoided mentioning the war, the loss, the reason I could never go home. When the lesson ended, Jamie approached with a drawing. "I made this for you." It showed me standing next to Miss Parker, in front of the rebuilt classroom. Both of us were smiling. Above us, written in careful letters, were the words, "Friends from far away." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Parker walked me out afterward, and we stood in the parking lot watching students board buses. "You're good at this," she said. "Teaching, I mean. You should consider it as a career option." "I'm a soldier." "You were a soldier. Now you're something else. Something you get to choose." I thought about that gold star, still tucked away in my belongings, about the weeks of learning and adapting and slowly becoming something other than what I'd always been. What if I choose wrong? Then you choose again. That's the thing about survival, Krell. It gives you the chance to keep choosing until you find something that fits. 6 months after crashing through her ceiling, I stood in that same classroom as an official teaching assistant. Parker had filed the paperwork, fought the bureaucracy, and made it happen through sheer stubborn determination. The students were working on a project about cultural diversity. Some were researching Earth's different countries. Others were creating presentations about newly discovered alien civilizations. A few were building models of my homeworld based on my descriptions. "Mr. Krell," Rebecca called out, "how do you spell Kethvar?" I spelled it out, watching as she carefully wrote each letter. Parker caught my eye from across the room and smiled. Not the tired smile I'd first seen, but something genuine and warm. And I realized that I'd found it, the thing that fit. Not soldier, not warrior, not refugee, teacher. The Zalgorath were still out there. The war continued. My people were still fighting and dying among the stars. But here, in this classroom, in this small corner of a planet I'd crashed into by accident, I was building something instead of destroying it. The bell rang. Students packed up, chattering about homework and weekend plans. Parker started erasing the board, preparing for the next class. "Same time tomorrow?" I asked. "Same time tomorrow," she confirmed. "And Krell? Thank you." "For what?" "For being late to your last lesson. If you'd been on time, I'd have missed all of this." She had a point. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst crashes. You just have to be willing to sit down, learn something new, and accept a gold star for participation. Even if you're a warrior who fell from the stars into a 7th grade science class.